everybody, it's Melody Snowflake, and today we'll be talking a little bit more about anxiety. Today's topic will be triggers. We'll be delving deeper into what triggers are and what they do and how they cause anxiety. So I touched on this a little bit in my first anxiety video when I talked briefly about my entire experience of anxiety. By the way, sidetracking a little, if you see my background's different because I'm filming this in the kitchen. So anyway, triggers. I touched on them a little bit in my first anxiety video, and I'll be going more into depth about them here. Once again, a disclaimer, triggers are different for everybody. So my triggers, what triggers me, may not be what triggers other people to have anxiety. So I just wanted to put that out there because what I'm about to talk about is not going to be something that everybody will exactly be able to be like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that being triggered by that thing is like, because it's everyone has a different trigger or triggers. So basically what a trigger is, especially from my experience, is when something happens that reminds you of something that occurred in the past that was upsetting. So I didn't really explain it too well in the last one, I'm sorry. But basically, that's what it is. It's something that reminds you, whether consciously or subconsciously, of an event in the past that hurt you or that upset you. Some people have different things that activate such triggers. Sometimes it can be a specific song, a specific sound, word, phrase, voice, place, even food, or just anything that can be associated with a painful past experience can be a trigger if someone has anxiety. Like I said, it's not the same for everybody. So if this doesn't apply to you or your friend or anyone you know, then that's perfectly understandable. For me personally, triggers can be any of these things, but they tend to be a lot more powerful when they are related to relationships. And by that I mean friendships, family, stuff like that. Not dating relationships. I don't date. I mean, I had crushes, but that's a different story. Anyway, I've had a few negative experiences in the past when it came to friendships, especially. So if something happens between me and a friend, even if it's a joke, they could say something that brings up a memory. Like, for example, if someone from my past, someone who left a painful impact on me, said something, and if someone I know now says the same thing, I'm sorry, I don't know what that sound was, but if someone says the same thing, it could bring back that memory, even if it's something that you thought you'd forgotten, or if it's a dormant memory, or it still brings it back, as long as it's still something that is sufficient enough to affect you. It doesn't work with every single memory you have of the person. Some things bring back more painful memories than others. Some things tend to trigger you harder than others. But basically, if something like that happens, my anxiety tends to act up because it reminds me of what that person who I had a painful experience with said or did, and it makes me wonder if this new person who just said it is going to do the same thing, because I start thinking like, oh, this has happened before. So one of the things that led up to it, or one of the things that happened before it happened, even if it's completely unrelated, the fact that it was the same person, if it happened before, could it happen again with this new person? So it triggers this anxiety, this anxious feeling, and it can run away with me. I don't normally tell the person, because not that I don't want to express, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this particular phrase or statement, because this is just a standardized thing. If something any of my friends says ever triggers anxiety, if one of my friends, if you're watching this, I don't want you to blame yourself. I personally don't hold anything against you for saying anything like that, because personally I don't remember anything specific as I'm recording this, so I don't hold it against anyone if you've ever said anything that triggered my anxiety. I don't normally talk about it or confront anybody about it, because I know deep down that it's not the person's fault. They're not saying it to purposefully trigger me to, like, they're not saying it to induce that anxiety on purpose. They didn't know. So I don't blame them for the effect that those words have on me. Though I would advise, if it's something that's very, 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 very sensitive, I would advise that you do talk to them about it. Like I said, I don't often tell my friends, but I do bring up something if it's really major. So if I've ever spoken to any of you, any of my friends, about like, hey, so that thing that happened earlier, yeah, that my brain took that and ran away with it, that would be because it's something that is really important to me, that really affected me, and I wanted you to know about it. Another kind of trigger is event related, and it's basically like the word trigger, except it's in a way a lot worse. An event related trigger is basically a trigger that happens when an event, it could be unrelated to the original, but when an event reminds you of something negative that happened in the past. It could be because something was said in a similar way, or something played out in a similar way, or the context seemed similar in some way or other. It doesn't have to be exact. It just has to remind you of it. And those are the worst kinds of triggers, because seeing an event play out and in front of you that is basically reminding you of a negative event in the past basically makes your brain go, oh my gosh, it's happening again. It's going to happen again with this person, with this situation, with this place, with that kind of thing. And it runs away with you. And these triggers cause the worst kind of anxiety, because you start seriously questioning everything. If an event-related trigger reminds you of a particularly negative thing that happened in the past that you feel could have been avoided if you had only paid attention to the signs, for example, if an event-related trigger reminds you of that, you start wondering if you have become complacent again, if you have missed signs for this one, or if you haven't, if you should start being very careful from now on. So especially if the event-related trigger is in relation to a person, it can be very tough, because you start doubting said person, even if the person didn't mean it in that way. You start wondering if they're going to do that same thing that's negative to you that someone else did in the past. That they're gonna hurt you in the same way, or the same bad thing is gonna happen between the two of you, or something like that. And you start feeling all these doubts and fears regarding the person or people involved. And you also start feeling guilty that you're doubting this person, because you know them, you know they're not like that, right? But then how can you be so sure? That would continue to eat at your mind. So it would be an endless cycle. You'd be having doubts, and then you'd be like, no, I know the person. I can't be having doubts about it. And I'm feeling guilty that I'm having doubts about it. And then you start thinking, How can you be so sure? And then you start doubting them again, and it's an endless cycle of this over and over again. Sometimes you're so convinced that this event, this trigger, basically means danger, that you start overanalyzing every other thing that didn't used to bother you about like a situation regarding this person or this group or anything related to the people involved with the event at all. And it never bothered you before because you knew it was harmless. But because this one event made you think, oh no, history is going to repeat itself, you start looking if there are any other signs, quote unquote, that could have pointed to history repeating itself that you had become, quote unquote, complacent by. And because of that, you start literally questioning everything and everyone you know, and their intentions, and the meaning behind some of their actions and deeds and words, and how they think of you. And you start questioning a lot, and it will hurt. It will feel like you're losing people, losing yourself, like you're going crazy, which I assure you you're not, but it's just what happens. If you have a friend who goes through anxiety and they come to you about a trigger, I want you to know that it's not your fault if you didn't know if it was an accident. The best thing you can do for them is to try not to do that trigger again, so that, you know, their brain won't go crazy and start, like, I'm not saying you are crazy, by the way, if you are the one with the anxiety, but so that you won't, so that the person having anxiety won't experience this trigger, because it can really affect a person in a very negative light. And if you are someone with anxiety experiencing this, well, I mean, I'm going through it myself, so all I can say is hang in there. We'll get through this together. My advice is to just talk to the person who or people who are involved in the trigger and tell them why it was bothering you, especially if it's something really major, whether it be event, word, or otherwise, so that you can so that they can understand, and so that you can also seek reassurance that that's not what is really happening here, and it'll help you feel better. And like I said, this is different for everybody, so if this is not what you experienced, that's understandable, but this is just what happens with me, and I just wanted to share my experience of triggers. So thank you so much for watching this video. This is all about triggers. It was quite an interesting topic to talk about. It wasn't easy. I had to do a few takes, especially for the second half. I just want you to know that you're all beautiful. And if any of my friends are watching this, and if I've ever come to you about triggers, I want you to know that I do not hold it against you at all, and I love you and appreciate you so much for still sticking by me, and for understanding, and for not calling me like, oh, you're overreacting, oh, you're just, you know, anything like that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate if you've watched this far. I'll see you guys soon in my other videos. Bye!